Hey everybody, Jeff here with the J Free 906 podcast. Now, recently on the podcast, we had Jeremy Church with Panther Geoscience. Jeremy was out there with Burton Cosgrove, and they did the seismic survey study in the swamp and also in the Money Pit area, all the way down to Smith's Cove. Now, in this particular podcast, we didn't have enough time to get through all of the information that Jeremy had to share with us. So these clips are from part one. We have part two coming up here this Thursday night, March 14th at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, and we hope you will not miss this particular show. Go back and check out part 1, and I got that linked in the description below, and then be sure to be with us live on Thursday, March 14th for part 2. Then he'll be talking about a lot of the information from the swamp and 10X. Now, to set this up, first I had asked him about the money pit and the makeup underground. We know that there's cavities and voids down there, but tell us a little bit about what you think they are and have they been used by man?
Sure. Okay, a little more background geology again, because I think what's happened in the money pit is something called a cover collapse sinkhole. Sinkholes are a common thing in Mahone Bay, and they are on Oak Island too, in a few spots. And what it is it's a very special type of sinkhole where you have really clay-rich sediments on top of where the sinkhole is happening. We are in a very clay-rich environment. You hear Marty cursing about the clay all the time. It's clay this, clay that. But because we have this carbonate below the east side of the island, below the money pit, and at one point, this was exposed at the surface and then it was buried, but meteoric waters, so just natural groundwater, has gotten in there and it slowly dissolves out this limestone. It's a very common thing all over the world. People are familiar with it all over the place. The difference is, though, is because of this clay-rich environment, you can see in this little cartoon, the clay starts to fall into that cavern a little bit, but it actually makes its own cavern inside the clay part. So, and you can see it grows and grows and grows, and then it collapses in on itself. So this is more my theory, but I have evidence from the seismic that there's definitely a cave system underneath the money pit, but it kind of gives multiple possibilities for how humans may have exploited the money pit area. They may have exploited this cavern that was made in the clay and never had to go down as deep as we're searching now, because things might have fallen into it, but it might have been much shallower, much easier digging. So this is the most plausible scenario, I think, for what happened. And of course, there is going to be depressions at the surface left over, possibly open holes to that karsted area, which might have been what the boys did find way back in the 70s. There was a depression. So
Next, we take a look at the seismic data in 3D. This is fascinating stuff. And pay attention to where he talks about this teardrop anomaly.
So here's some 3D modeling that I did. So to go from this to this is actually, it takes another specialized package to do this. It's the problem with seismic is it's like a big cube of data, right? Like it's not just like, one chunk of data here, one chunk of data there. It's a big cube of solid data. So you need to mine through the data and pull out the information you want. So when you look at it in a section like this, the human eye does it for you, right? It says it gets drawn to the low density areas, but there's data all through there. But really what we want to do is we want to shrink wrap the core anomalies and look at them in a you want to see their geometry, their morphology in a 3D space. So there's another package I brought in to do this, that basically I said, okay, take this feature, shrink wrap it for me. And so the 3D visualizer can basically shrink wrap it. You can adjust the tautness of how it shrink wraps it to give more detail or less. But the idea is to now pull this feature out of the 2D world into the 3D world. And so I did that. But what can happen very quickly is, even though we live in a 3-dimensional world, humans really are 2D critters. We really perceive things in 2 dimensions. That's really what's most intuitive to us. So you can get disoriented very quickly in a 3D world, especially when you don't have good landmarks and stuff like that. So what I've done here in these panels is show where the garden shaft is. That's basically this tunnel A. Look at that little dot. That's where the garden shaft lives. And this little U shape is the outline of Rick's monument there. That's the rocks. So this is kind of your landmark to know where you are. And then you have C1 on here. So there's a C1 and H8. is this guy down here, if you can see my cursor.
Yep.
Panel on the left is zoomed out more. We're a little more zoomed in here. So this, to me, was the most interesting anomaly out of everything I've seen, of all the data, because it directly connects a low density linear feature at 100 feet from the garden shaft to C1, which, as the story goes, the searchers knew where the money pit was, where the treasure truly was, and they tunneled directly to over top of it. So now, of course, it doesn't look like a nice, perfect tunnel, and this is the nature of the beast with seismic. It's not going to be knife edges. It's not going to be like a photograph. There's a hazy halo around these things. The other thing is these shafts are all collapsed and smushed and, you know, deformed in ways. So it's not going to look like a nice, perfect shaft. But this is a very linear feature, continuous linear feature that connects very major features. There is this really interesting U-turn that was taken in here. It caused quite a stir early on with the team. Didn't really go anywhere because there was talk that tunnelers had gone around the money pit, so they got real excited. Is it in this void here? Either way, very interesting geometry. And then, of course, this thing down here, the fork, and we'll look at it in a kind of a rotated view here, but you basically have two fingers on this thing going at different angles. One's going up, one's going down. And lo and behold, one terminates right at H8, essentially. Tunnel to H8. So,
and is that red? Is that higher density?
Sorry, in this case, the color's tied to the structure, the elevation of it. So reds are higher.
Okay.
Cooler are lower.
Okay.
That's a pretty distinct shape. I don't see any other like 90-degree angles almost anywhere else on this.
No, that's why it was very exciting. And where it terminated right at H8, like it was, there's something to it. Now, whether this is a searcher age, this is at the 100-foot depth level. So it should be searcher in nature, but, you know, it's significant, but, you know, I don't know. It's not my job personally to make sense of it necessarily, but it is from a seismic standpoint, it's very significant.
Yeah, and I was going to point out too that at 100 feet, folks, from the garden shaft heading towards the southwest, what do we have that's happening on the show right now that's 100 foot at depth, and it's heading that direction? So, I mean, here you have something that is actually showing what they're finding right now or last summer on the show. So interesting. I just wanted to point that out real quick. So I'm glad you when you said 100 foot, it was like, you know, bells were going off in my head.
It's a very significant depth for a number of reasons, seismically and from what they're finding on the show. From all accounts from the searchers, 100 feet seemed to be a magic number for a lot of different things. I have other anomalies that aren't in this presentation out to the east that are similar depth as well in nature. So, but what they do is it sits on top of that cave system, basically, right? It centers on top of the cave. So somebody was going here at 100 feet to get on top of that cave system.
Wow.
So what is this? Well, this is at that 150 to 160 foot depth. This is the solution channel. This is what it is. This is a cave system, solution system that goes from the money pit. So you have H8 right there. C1 is the red triangle. This is the main cave geometry in the money pit. In this case, reds mean lowest density. That's what they mean. Reds are lowest. So it's the convention in geophysics is typically you want to color the property that you want, the thing that you're after, red. So anything's red, that's significant. So you have this lowest density, and then you have this really crazy little, I call it the teardrop anomaly, where it's nestled in between H8 and C1, right within that, basically right in the center of that cave system. And that's what I showed you in cross section on the previous slide. So that little teardrop thing is centered right on top of this. Wow. It's actually this little depression you can see right here, this little thing right here.
Oh yeah, yep.
So that's what this is, but it's connected to a larger system that feeds over to Smith's Cove. It's a big cavern. It's a big cavern here that's kind of connected to more kind of linear cave tunnel systems. But this is more of a massive kind of cave, I would call it, under the money pit, basically centered under the money pit.
Wow.
So the red in Smith's Cove, that's about the same depth as the cave?
Wow.
Interesting.
Here's your zoom of my teardrop thing. So you got some numbers for scale. So it's about 15 feet across. There's also two pretty significant boreholes that were put in it, 7.5 and 6.5. They found some interesting things in those boreholes too, and they pretty much directly intersect this thing. But yeah, you see it's perfectly nestled between C1 and H8. The other cool thing is there's kind of a split in this cave system, and there's this kind of little linear channely thing comes into C1, but it's hard because it's a three-dimensional shape. It's kind of tough to visualize from this, but all I want you guys to take away from this is these are significant. I think these are some of the most significant anomalies, if not the most significant anomalies on the island.
And I think that's basically where they're drilling right now again. Yeah. RF1 was in that general area, and that's where they're nailing now. They're trying to, and the problem that they have too, folks, and you've seen this on here, is that when they're drilling with that 6-inch borehole, that thing walks so far. So if they're trying to drill right there in the center of that teardrop anomaly, it may walk and end up at the bottom. It may miss it completely because it walked 10 feet over and it's only 15 feet wide. So,
yeah, absolutely. And we got a video here, guys.
Oh, good.
Now this is kind of jerky. It's hard to kind of drive this thing really smooth, but yeah, here I just kind of wanted to rotate the whole thing. It'll also fly inside of it in a second, so you can see kind of the insides of it. And the other videos I have, they give you a fly through. I'm really bummed because I basically float through that linear feature that goes from the garden shaft to C1. You can go right through kind of the tunnel, but we're inside the cave here. This is H8 right here, that yellow line, that's H8. So there's this really interesting depression too within the cave system that H8 has intersected. The other interesting feature, you see this right here, this here to the right of the screen. So you see that the depression where H8 intersects, there's this little high thing here.
Yes.
That high thing, that corresponds with the teardrop shape thing that I showed. Absolutely. And the other thing I want you to pay attention to here is red is low density. This is an increase in density relative to that. So there's something harder in here as well.
Like a vault?
Perhaps, sir.
Perhaps, yes. This was really interesting information. Now, be sure to check out part 2 coming up Wednesday night, March 14th, 7:30 p.m. Eastern, right here, the J Free 906 podcast.